Hey everyone! I hope everybody can hear me. This is my first live stream. Hey everyone! I hope everybody can hear me. This is my first live stream. Oh, maybe I should take my headphones out. Is that better? Maybe I should take my headphones out. Is that better? I knew you had to be from Newfoundland, Chelsea with Best Kind. Okay. I knew you had to be from Newfoundland, Chelsea with Best Kind. All right, so we're gonna get started. So yeah, this is a live YouTube live session related to the BeeBots. So I'm just going to kind of explain who I am and try and keep an eye on the chat as well. So I'm Rachel McKeegan, and I'm a program specialist with Brilliant Labs. I'm based out of Cape Breton. So I've been working with the BeeBots for a while now, and I initially wasn't a huge fan of them, but now that I've used them a little bit more and kind of have some techniques down, I think they are really helpful for using with some of the younger grades. So maybe if everybody, so I see there's 7 people watching now, so a few of you I know, like Wiley and Sarah. So Chelsea, you're from Labrador. Does everybody else want to kind of put in the live chat where you're from, maybe what classes you teach, just so we can all get an idea of who each other is? So as people kind of join in, just let us know who you are. If not, we're just going to kind of jump right into what we're going to be going over today. I don't want to keep everybody too long. I know school day's over for most of you. So basically, we're going to go over an introduction to the BeeBot itself and how I generally like to introduce it to students and to teachers. And then we're going to talk a little bit. There's going to be a pre-recorded session as well. This just shows you how to use the BeeBot and its basic functions and things like that. And then there's also going to be a section that's on how to create your own DIY mats and kind of put it in with curriculum ties. Then we'll have kind of a bit of a wrap up, and there are some resources. You may have noticed already that there's a link in the description of this video that has a link to a Google Drive. So we'll get to that a little bit later too. So if anybody has any questions at all, just pop them in the chat. There'll be plenty of time where we'll see, we'll go back to the chat and kind of see how everybody's doing. So I see we've got, yeah, so Chelsea, you're from kindergarten, grade 1. That's awesome. And you teach technology 7 and 9. That is very cool. And Snow Central, yeah, like God bless y'all for getting through that. Or maybe you're still not already through it, but God bless y'all anyway. So I'm just going to jump into, I'm going to grab a little BeeBot here. Mine are actually BlueBots. They're a little bit different. Just you can basically see inside of them, and you can connect to them with Bluetooth, but they work the exact same way as the BeeBot. These are kind of nice though, because you can see inside, and the kids get to see the different components and everything. Oh, it's so weird to have things backwards. But yeah, so all of my demonstrations are going to be with these today, but they work exactly the same as the BeeBot. So it is meant, at least in Nova Scotia, how it was sent out, to work with P to grade 1s and teaching them things like computational thinking and the basics of learning how to code. So without having to use a computer or an iPad or anything like that. So it gets them thinking in terms of sequencing. The way that I usually start introducing the BeeBot to a class is When you first get your bee-bot, yours will probably look like an actual bee. This is called a blue bot, but they work the exact same way. And what you'll notice is you'll have the bee-bot, and you'll have a USB cord with it. And the place where you plug it in is right down here. And this is the rechargeable battery, the on-off switches, and you can also see it's got some motors to control the wheels. And then with these blue bots, you can actually see the microchip inside that controls the wheels and the motors. So what you'd want to do is plug in your bee-bot. Like so. And then you'll have to plug it in either to a power bank or a power supply that has a USB, or you can plug it into a laptop. You'll see the lights will turn blue, and then they will turn either red or green. So red means that the bee-bot still needs to be charged, and green will mean that it's ready to go. And you can usually get an hour, hour and a half out of them before they need to start getting charged again. So we can see now our bee-bot is charged. Its eyes are green, so it's good to go. Just unplug it from the charger. Now again, at your schools, you have almost like a beehive shaped charger that your bee-bots can kind of sit in. So if you plug that into the wall and you just sit your bee-bots on top of the little charging cord, it should be good. If the eyes aren't lighting up then there's an issue with the bee-bot. So it will red or green if it is. So look at the app that we use to write the code for the bee-bot and to create our algorithms. We have the move forward. See, we have the turn, move backward, turn left. Down here are the pause, if you wanted to have pause for a second. And this is the X here is the delete. Or what I try and explain to the kids is it's like a forget. It makes the bee-bot forget any previous code that it had. So one of the most important things with the bee-bot, and to let the kids know, is that bee-bots or any kind of robot are only as accurate as the person who's coding them. So it's really us and how particular we are with our instructions that will determine how successful the bee-bot is in achieving its mission. So we're going to turn this bee-bot on. So on the bottom there's two switches, one for power and one for sound. So you can still use the bee-bot without any of its sounds, which I think is great for any students that have any sensory issues related to sound. These aren't super loud per se, but I know that for some students that can be an issue, especially in the Learning Center. So we're going to turn the sound on though, and you'll be able to hear it. So it just basically plays sounds when you touch the buttons, and also when it completes its mission, or it completes its instructions. It's not necessarily the case that it'll be successful. So what I'm going to demonstrate first is the way that the bee-bot remembers instructions, or algorithms as we've told the students that they're called, or code, however we choose to name that. So I'm going to put some instructions in and see what happens. So I'm going to press forward twice. Now, once you've pressed those buttons, the bee-bot remembers those instructions, and then if we want them to start or to execute that code, what we have to do is press this go button in the middle. So it's going forward, 1 and 2, and it flashes its eyes when it's done to let you know it's finished executing that code. So if we take it back here now, and say I wanted to turn left and then go backwards. So let's execute that code. So you can see that it's doing the move forwards and then doing the turn and the backward. So it remembers and builds upon its code. So if we want it to start all over again and to be able to write an algorithm or a piece of code right from scratch, what we have to do is press the X button before that. And that's how we make the Bee-Bot forget any previous instructions that we gave to it. So now if we wanted it to go turn left and go back, we should be able to do that. So turn left and go back. So great. That's a really good tip for the kids to know. And really, if I was explaining it to them, I don't know that I would really even start on the grid so much as just explaining, have them sit in a circle and explain to them the different directions that the robot goes in and kind of exploring what each of these buttons does. Because one of the things that really tends to trip up the students is that these buttons aren't really movement buttons. They're just turning buttons. So this is a forward motion, this is a backward motion, but the left and the right buttons only turn. So if you wanted, say, your robot, Bee-Bot, to get to this square, what you'd have to do, like this square just next to it, what you'd have to do is press this button and then the forward button. Whereas most of the students think you just press this and it'll turn and go over there. So that's an important step that the students need to become familiar with before I would really even introduce the grid to the situation. So let's try that. So we're going to press X and we want it to get here over to this next one. So we're going to press this and forward. Now let's see what we get. So it turns and it moves forward. So that's perfect. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how you might start using the grid. Like I said, I would probably start in a circle and maybe even just have kids be a distance away from each other and have them estimate how many forwards it would take to get where they need to go, or something like that, just to get them familiar, or sit them in the circle and say, okay, what would we press if we wanted to have our robot get over to Susie, and maybe Susie is forward but to the right. So then they would get an understanding of that the turn is just a turn and it's not a turn and a forward. So there's a couple different ways that I would start with the grid. You can just start right away with a grid like this, and then you can put something that the Bee-Bot is trying to get to. So for instance, this flower, so this will be the start position of our Bee-Bot, and we want it, actually I'm going to make it a little more difficult. We're going to make our start position here, and we're trying to get to this flower. Now, having the kids just start pressing buttons here to try and determine how to get it there, you will eventually get success. I'm sure of it, but I think one of the ways to teach them particularly about computational thinking is to have them write their code or their algorithm before they try it on the Bee-Bot. So then it becomes more of an exercise and a learning opportunity as opposed to fun. And they are fun, and that's a great thing to do in the classroom as well. But what I have over here are some print-offs of the directions. And this is even a good activity in terms of vocabulary as well, because the directions are written on here. And even when at the end, when all of these are kind of scattered around, even students putting them back together in the right piles is good to know the difference between the forward and the backward, because they do look like the same direction if you aren't able to identify the words at the bottom. So that can be a good exercise in and of itself. But what we're going to do here is we're going to write code from top to bottom before we execute the code. So for instance, we would want here to have our Bee-Bot go forward one. So we're going to take one of these and we're going to put it here and say we're going to go forward. And then we'd want our Bee-Bot to go forward again. And they could take the bot and move it by hand if they want. So we'd want it to go forward again. I'll do this one over here. And then we want the B-Bot to turn to the right. Okay, so we'll find an arrow that's turned to the right. And then we'd want it to go forward one more. So we'll come back over and grab another forward. And then the button that we would have to press is our go button. So now we have our code here on the side. We're going from top to bottom. Definitely if you wanted to go bottom to top, you could, or side to side. I like going from top to bottom because when the students get a little bit older and they start doing visual-based coding, like drag and drop coding, like for microbits or for Scratch, the code executes from the top to the bottom. And so it just might be more familiar with them as they get older and start using more coding platforms. But really it's up to you and how you want to handle that in your classroom. So we're going to start it back at the starting point here, and we're going to press the forget, so it forgets any other code, and then we're just going to start putting in the code here. So the students, I would do this as a demonstration, either up on the board you could do it, you could write out a grid that way, or you could do the demonstration around a grid before you put them into small groups. But once the kids are in smaller groups, they can work together to write this code, or they can take turns and they can work together, or they can take turns pressing the buttons for it as well. But I wouldn't let them, or I would make it a rule or part of the activity that we don't touch or start coding the robot until we have the code the way that we want it. It doesn't need to be right. In fact, I think it's a great learning opportunity if it's not right the first time around, but that they have to have a full list of what they want to have happen before they start pressing the buttons on here. And I would encourage you all to let them fail a few times and to see where the errors are, as opposed to checking their code when it's in this form and saying, oh, that doesn't look right. Let them try it and then go through the process of what we would call debugging. So that's kind of a fun thing for them to think about too. Like, okay, so go through your code and find out where the bug is and where the problem is and how can we fix that and start over again. So we're going to run this code now. So we press the X to make it forget. So we're going to just follow the code. So from the top we have a forward, and then we have a forward, and then we have a turn right, and we have a forward, and then we have a go. So let's have a go. Awesome, so we made it. Now if you wanted to, you could tape these down with a little bit of painter's tape. I don't usually mind, especially when we're getting started, and the kids don't really seem to mind either. So then you could make it a little bit more difficult. You could add something in, like an obstacle, like a tree. So the B-Bot can't go through the tree, it will have to go around it. So you could make it like a little more difficult by putting it here. So it would change the route that they can possibly take. If you wanted to add even more obstacles, I'll put the link to print out these arrows and the flowers and the obstacles in a Google Drive after the session. So you'll all get a link to that, but there's a rock and there's a stump, so you can make it progressively more difficult. I mean, obviously you can't do something like this because then the B-Bot is trapped, can't get through a stump, can't get through a rock, but you can progressively make it more difficult. And we're gonna jump back into the live stream now so we can talk a little bit about some other options for mats as well, because there's some great resources out there. Another great way to introduce the B-Bot's basic motions and the concept of writing your code and algorithms before you actually have the B-Bot complete them is these little worksheets like this. So there will be some copies of these in the drive as well. The drive has a mixture of lots of different things, so some of things that we've developed, some things that we found. I know Jeff Rain in the Tri-County School Board put a lot together, as well as Leanna Campbell McDonald in the Cape Breton Victoria Center for Education. So we're going to kind of consolidate everything together and put it up there. But little sheets like this can be done even without the BBOT, just to get the students familiar with the directions. So, this would be our start and this would be our finish. So which arrows do we have to put here in order to complete the challenge? So you can see that these ones are sort of lined up side to side, but again, that's fine. However you want to do it. So we could go through this together. So we'd be starting here. So we'd want, sorry, I'm going to be writing with my left hand. So we'd want a forward. Watch this pen not work. Forward, and then we would want a turn right, and then we'd want a forward. So that might be the piece that the students forget, again, because it's the turn and it doesn't go forward. So then we'd be facing this direction, so we'd want to turn to the left. So you might not want to start with something so complicated, but so turn to the left and then a forward. And then we'd want another forward. Then we'd want to turn to the right. And then we'd want a forward. And then we'd want a turn to the left. And then a forward. And then a turn to the left again. And then a forward. And then we'd want to turn to the right. And then a forward. Okay, this is a hard sheet. Let's see if we did it. So my grid is a little bit different, but if we were to put our flower in the same spot, we'd want it to finish here, I think. So we don't have a 4x4 grid here, but we'll start outside of our grid. God, I hope this works. It's going to be very embarrassing. So this is a long piece of code. So let's see what we can do here. So let's pull it over here. We're going to make it forget. And let's do our code. So we've got a forward, a right, forward, a left, forward, a forward, a right, a forward, a left, a forward, a left, a forward, a right, and a forward. Oh God. Not convinced, everybody. Let's try our best. Let's press go. All right. All right, that's something, that's something. Up, up, turn. Oh, we're gonna have to stop it. That's not gonna work. So, even we're not perfect. So maybe write these in pencil, and maybe start with something a little simpler than all of those turns. And if you picked it up correctly the first time around, well done. Okay, first thing I'm going to show you to do is to make a Bebop grid using just some painter's tape and a ruler. You could use of any other kind of tape, like electrical tape. I just like painter's tape because it's bright colors, and also it's really easy to remove off of lots of different types of floors. If you leave it on those linoleum floors for a long time, like sometimes you need to scrape it off a little bit, but for the most part it comes up good and it sticks to most things. Now, if you're in schools, you probably have access to the clear mats that already have the grid on them, in which case you wouldn't need to do this. But what you should do is roll out the mat flat before you want to use it, because if they've been rolled up, sometimes it takes a while for the plastic to relax again. So it'd be good to just put it out on the floor maybe the night before you want to use it, and put some weighted books or something on it, and so it'll be nice and flat for when you want to use it, because the Bebop has a hard time going over, like if there's waves or anything. Well, that was really close up on my hand. So yeah, I'm going to show you how to make this. I mean, essentially you just need to get your measurements correct. So I usually run like one line up one side and then just start measuring. So the distance of the blocks is 15 centimeters. So you'd want to do like the 0 point here and then over to 15, kind of in the middle. So yeah, we're gonna get started. I'm gonna do like a quick time-lapse video of that happening so you can get the idea. Okay, so here is our finished grid. As you can see, I don't worry too much about these little end pieces here. You can clean them up if you want to, but just as long as the blocks are roughly 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters, it should all work really good. I also wouldn't typically put this on top of a table like I have here now, only because if the students get the measurements wrong, you could end up with a Bebop on the floor, so nobody would want that. So we're going to get started. So now I'm going to show you where the resources are that were put together for people for the live stream. So you'll see that there's a link in the description for the live stream, and I'll also put it in the chat when we start. But it's just going to link to a Google Drive that is view only, so it'll be called Bebop Resources, and it's got a few different folders in here. So the introduction one has things like a copy of the arrows. It is a great Bebop quick start guide that was created by Jeff Rain, and it's got a poster for what each of the arrows is, as well as this great little demonstration of the coding cycle. You test your code, you change or debug your code, you check if it worked again, and then this circles back until you reach success. There's also a labeled version of the Bebop. Under this planning folder, you have some things like that Bebop challenge sheet. Like I said, you might want to make it a little bit easier for students starting off than the one that we did in the video. There's a lesson planning template. There's also some blocks here that are the right size for the grid if students wanted to create their own blocks, or if you wanted to create them too. There's also these jackets. So these are printable, just kind of skins that can go over the Bebop just to make it a little bit more fun. And also for storytelling purposes, these There's also some blocks here that are the right size for the grid if students wanted to create their own blocks, or if you wanted to create them too. There's also these jackets. So these are printable, yeah, just kind of skins that can go over the Bebot just to make it a little bit more fun, and also for storytelling purposes. We are back with sound. No, still no sound. Wicked.
There's also some blocks here that are the right size for the grid. The students wanted to create their own.
Great. So now I can actually say some things, which is great. So thank you so much for your patience. This was my very first live stream. And there are a few more things in that folder as well. So there's a few things for math, there's some English language arts stuff in there, and there's actually a really cool, yay for sound, Jeopardy game. So what it is a, it's like a whole big sort of document that you write out all the questions, so it can be used for any class really. And you write out the questions, and then the grid is almost like a Jeopardy grid that has the total amounts on it. And then the student has to like program the Bebot to get to a square that hasn't been answered yet. And if they don't get to the square that's been answered yet, then they lose their turn. And if they get to the square, then they have to answer the question in order to get the point value for it. So that can be really customized to anything. Now, it's a view-only folder that the Google Drive stuff is. So if you want to have access to it yourself and to edit it, what you'd have to do is go to like File and then make a copy, or even better, File and add to my drive. Then you'll get your own copy of it, and you'll be able to edit it, and it won't stay in that shared Google Drive. So I would encourage you to go in there and have a look at some of the resources that are there. I really think the jackets are cool too. I haven't had a chance to use those yet, but I think it would be a really fantastic way to have the students kind of write their own stories. There's also a couple of resources in there that are just the blank blocks, like a 6 by 6 inch block or a 5.5 by 5.5 inch block that you could just print out, and then the students can kind of do their own story. I actually saw a really kind of cute idea on Twitter the other day. And so what else did I want to mention? Yeah, just there are definitely mats that are going to be out there in your schools, and those are great to use. In fact, there are some resources in that Google Drive to use with like the letters mat and the numbers mat, just to do some basic things. But I think it's also really useful to use the Bebots kind of in an inventive way. There was a teacher here in Cape Breton that was using it in the resource center as a way to manage emotions. So she had a set of cards that had the pictures of like different emotions that a student can have, and some of the ways that they can manage them. And so along with writing the code, like along the side of like, you go up and you turn and you go down, she also had a strategy for coping with negative emotions there too. So as the Bebot was trying to get to a more positive emotion, these coping skills the student was doing along with the Bebot. So it just makes it a little bit more externally focused for the child too. It's not as much about their behavior, that it can be kind of about what the Bebot's going through as a way for them to talk and to share their experiences too. And I thought that was a really inventive way to use the Bebot. They can be a really fun resource and a great way to do centers and things like that, but they can also have a really important impact, I think, on students as well, especially at those younger grades. And it is a great way to teach them cardinal directions, obviously. It's a great way to teach them, like I said, that computational thinking that'll prepare them for later on down the road when they start doing more complex coding. And yeah, I just think you should definitely jump in and try things out with the Bebot and kind of see how it goes. Maybe I'm going to jump back into see if there's any questions in the chat. That was a really cute activity, Melissa. Like when I saw that on Twitter, I was like, I need to put that into the live stream. So yeah, I thought that was very, very cute. Even doing another like town or another like a geography lesson, maybe St. Petersburg or something like that, all of the main landmarks that are there. So I think that's probably all that I have for today. I hope those pre-recorded videos were helpful. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk a little bit about how I introduce it. We have a couple minutes left, so maybe I will talk about that. So how I usually introduce the Bee-Bot is I have all of the students kind of sit around in a circle, and we talk a little bit about instructions and how there are different names for certain sets of instructions. So the usual one that I use would be like cooking or baking, right? Most of the students will have, maybe made some cookies with mom or dad or with grandma and grandpa. And so I asked them, well, what is the special name for the set of instructions that you use when you're baking some cookies? And some of them know and some of them don't. But every time I would say, well, it's called a recipe, they've all usually heard that word before. And how important it is to follow the recipe, because if we put salt in instead of sugar, then we're not going to get the end result that we want. And so when we talk about the Bee-Bot or the Blue-Bot, it needs to have really specific instructions in order for us to do what we want it to do. And those specific instructions are called an algorithm, or it's called code, or it's called a program. You can choose kind of whatever word you think would be most appropriate for your age level. The kids really like the word algorithm because it's got so many syllables, and usually I'd get them to we'd test it out and we'd do, the algorithm and talk about the syllables, and it's just a cool word that then they can go and tell their parents about. I learned what an algorithm is today. But basically that it's just a set of instructions that's specific to robots and to other things that are coded electronically. And then, we would talk a little bit, just like I showed in the video, about how the motions work. And I'd probably start off grid and get the kids just kind of familiar with it and get to play around a little bit with the buttons before we would jump into actually having them use the little arrow keys to make their little algorithm and to debug their algorithm using that cycle. So yeah, that's usually how I would explain it to them. It keeps them really, when they see this, they get really excited, but when we sit down, we actually have a conversation and we're talking back and forth, it relaxes them a little bit, and they just seem a little bit more open to doing a more structured activity, which I think is helpful for this. Because if they're just pressing buttons and not making it forget every time, then they can get frustrated easily that it's not working the way that they want it to. Another thing that I usually do is I'll have a motion related to the delete button or the forget button. So I'll be like, this is the forget, or forget. So it's something that they physically have to kind of do too, and they like doing. So when they bring it back to the start to try coding again, be like, well, what does it have to do? It has to forget, right? Or it has to forget. So that usually keeps it in their mind a little bit better. So yeah, that's usually how I would introduce it, and if anybody needs any help with it or would like me to come in and do a classroom visit in Cape Breton within reason, I can't come to Newfoundland, although I would love to, I've never been, then yeah, just send me an email, it's in the description. I also wanted to let everybody know a little bit about the project fund that we have here at Brilliant Labs. So teachers can request project funding for their classroom to do a Bee-Bot thing, or to do kind of anything else that really sparks your passion. And you probably have seen in the little scrolly thing down there the link. So to learn more about our project fund, you can go to www.brilliantlabs.ca/funding, and it's a pretty simple application, and if you have any trouble with it or anything, just send one of us a message and we'll definitely help you out. So I'm going to jump back into the chat and see if there's any questions. Yeah, the plastic tablecloths I've heard is a really good idea too. I usually use the grids just because I'm usually going to schools, and if they usually have the plastic mats that come from Bebop, but they're always rolled up, and it's hard to get them flat if I'm just arriving there in the morning. But yeah, they would definitely be cheaper than the ones that come from Bebop. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, that's a great idea, Melissa. Oh, thanks for saying it was a great session, Chelsea. It'll be so much better next time. So yeah, well, I might take you up on that offer, Chelsea. You're in Labrador though, right? Maybe the summertime, although there's no school. I don't know, closer to the summertime. So if anybody has any other questions, definitely send an email or hit Brilliant Labs up on Twitter at Brilliant Labs and Brilliant_Labs, I think. And if that's all, I'm going to sign off. Ooh, they don't kink. Good to know, Melissa. Maybe I'll pop that in the little intro to Bebop's thing that Jeff had put up there. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your patience. When this comes back up as a recorded video, I'm going to edit it, and hopefully it won't look too terrible and it'll get the main points across. If not, I'll throw up like a completely pre-recorded video. But too many flies. I think I'd rather flies than snow. I don't know. Maybe not. Are you saying there's no good time to come to Labrador? I hope that's not the case. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.